going on, everybody? Another week, another UFC event in the books. I'm your guy, Antoine Jackson. We're going to talk through it. What happened last week? So last week was UFC Fight Night Vegas. Merab Dvalishvili against Petr Yan. Yeah, that didn't go exactly how I thought. So, but let's dive right into it. So just to give you the results, if you don't know, Merab basically washed Petr Yan with a unanimous decision, 5 rounds to zip, and made it look easy. What was crazy about it was the pace. I mean, how can anybody keep a pace like that? So what Petr normally does is he tries to get his bearings from the first round or two, and then he starts turning on and engage and implement his game plan the way that he normally does it. And Rob didn't give him any time, any chances to do anything like that. Rob used his cardio, he weaponized it. And what's interesting about Merab is he's not the most technical fighter, I don't think. He would do this thing where he would throw a right hand, and while he's throwing the right hand, he's grabbing at the left leg. And so in doing that, it kind of throws you off, and he's continuously doing it. I think he may have set the record for the most takedown attempts. He didn't get the takedown every time, but he made Peter think about it. And all that thinking, I think Dean Thomas said that he was overloading his circuit, and he was. He just made Peter think so much that it froze him, and Peter just wasn't able to get anything going. I mean, he got a few leg kicks, and he nailed him a couple of times, but nothing significant, and Rob just walked away with the victory. It was a clinic in how you weaponize your cardio. People like Colby Covington is a person that does things like this, but Merab did it on a level that I don't know that I can even recall somebody doing like this. You know, when they do training, they'll do something where the fighter, he does a round, and then the first person comes in and he does a round with that person, and the first person comes in. Merab looked like he was the first person that was coming in every round, and Peter was fighting through all of them. It looked insane. And so what this does is this creates quite a problem for the UFC. So according to the rankings today, Merab moved up to number 1, which pushes Sean O'Malley down to number 2. I think Cheeto's number 3. So what normally happens in a number 1 contender, they're gonna come in and ask for a title shot, and more than likely work their way to figuring out when that title shot is gonna actually commence. But since Merab and Aljo are teammates and friends, they've agreed that they're not gonna fight each other. And of course, this always pisses Dana off when this happens. I think I remember, obviously Daniel Cormier and Cain Velasquez come to mind. It wasn't exactly this situation. They actually just ended up going into or being in different weight classes, which actually helped the situation. But I think John Fitch and Josh Koscheck had this similar situation quite some while ago. And it was the same thing. Dana and the people that actually make the fights were pushing them. If you're there, you have to fight each other in order to keep the division rolling. So this is going to be something that's going to be widely talked about. If Merab is not going to fight for the belt, which he is absolutely not, I think it would be interesting for him to fight down in the division in a very interesting fight. Now, I don't know if they would book this yet, but a very interesting fight would be against Umar Nurmagamedov. Now, for those that don't know, Umar is, I believe, Khabib's cousin, undefeated fighter in the bantamweight division. I think he's ranked number, 13, something like that. It would be a big jump, but they're not opposed to doing that. Suga Show fought, I think he was ranked, 10, 11, 12 when he fought Petr Yan, who was ranked number 1. And, no matter which side of the fence you are on that, it was a competitive fight. And I think that Umar against Merab would be a competitive fight also. So that would be a very interesting fight for the division. That fight there really solidified Merab's place atop the bantamweight division. And whenever Aljo decides to move up, no matter what happens with this Henry Cejudo fight, I think that Aljo's wanting, if things go his way, he wants it to be, he beats Henry Cejudo, and then he beats Sean O'Malley, and then he moves up. It may not work that way, but if it does, then that would be the time that Merab would fight for the belt, according to their plan. But we'll see how that works. It's a very interesting wrench that they've thrown into the bantamweight division. So the next fight was Alexander Volkov against Alexander Romanov. And this fight was over before it began. I think that Alexander Romanov lost this fight leading up to the fight. He looked very out of shape. He just didn't seem like he was prepared for this fight. For those who aren't aware of his fighting style, he's takedown heavy. He likes to apply pressure from that angle, from a grappling perspective. And his striking is very rudimentary. And this was the classic striker versus grappler matchup. But Alexander Volkov has been doing a lot of intense grappling training. He knows he's got that striking bucket check. And so he's not necessarily worried about that. What he was worried about was the fact that he would get into these situations, these next level fights that were going to really push him into the title picture, and his grappling would be what fails him. And so he didn't want to go through that again, and he made an intensive effort to shore up that particular part of his game. And it definitely showed when he was able to push off, any of the takedown attempts, even though they weren't necessarily set up very well. They were pretty well telegraphed, but Volkov was able to get away from those, implement his striking, and he made it look easy. It was a dominant win. And what he said as far as after the fight is that he wants to go and avenge some of his losses. So that would be, somebody like, which I don't think that this would be the fight to make, but somebody like a Derek Lewis, which he was winning that fight against Derek Lewis, and Derek Lewis does what he does. And, if he touches you, it's going to be a problem. And he ended that fight. But I think one that makes a little bit more sense for Alexander and his trajectory going up would be against Ciryl Gane. And it would actually make sense for Ciryl Gane as well, because both are a little bit further down in the rankings, but they're not far down in the rankings. And Ciryl wouldn't want to fight too far down in the rankings. I think he wants to stay relevant in that top, mix with Curtis Blades, Tai Tuivasa, Aspinall, in that certain range. And Volkov is not far off from that. So I think that fight, that rematch would actually make sense for both parties. And that could actually headline a fight night. I think that would be really interesting. Two of the best strikers in the division. Yeah, that would be a really good fight. And I think that it may go a little bit differently than the first one did, but it would be one to make. The next one on the list was Nikita Krylov against Ryan Spann. And this is one that was rescheduled. It was originally scheduled for a couple of weeks ago, but Krylov got sick. So they rescheduled it this week at a catch weight. So both didn't have to cut weight again. And from the word go, Ryan Spann was headhunting. You could tell that he wanted to get Krylov out of there. He was throwing heavy right hands. But Krylov, did his thing. And the thing about Krylov is he's fought a lot of the top contenders, come out on the losing end on a lot of those, but he has a lot of experience against varying types of skill sets. And he was able to kind of weather that storm, so to speak, and get it into more of a grappling battle. And Ryan Spann is not a slouch on the ground by any means. He's very good on the ground. But in this matchup, Krylov was just a step ahead. Now, I will say that, I'm not gonna lie, I was going for Ryan Spann going into this, simply because I'm from Dallas. He trains out of Dallas, out of Fortis MMA. Anybody out of Fortis MMA, I'm gonna be pulling for them. But I do respect that the abilities of Krylov, and especially on the ground. And like I said, he was one step ahead of him. Any move that Ryan Spann made to try to advance the position during their scrambles, which were amazing, Krylov was just one step ahead. And I saw a lot of people on Twitter that were remarking and saying that it was sloppy. And I think that was just them not necessarily knowing what they were seeing because of the transitions. But it was a very high level chess match, and Krylov just happened to catch him and was able to submit him. But I don't think that it's necessarily a black mark on Ryan Spann. He does get into these situations where he's stuck, kind of plateaus in the rankings, whether it's going against somebody like Anthony Smith or like a Nikita Krylov, where he's able to jump into a higher, maybe that mid of the top 10, and he just kind of falls flat. But I think that he's going to come back and do something well. I think that a good fight against somebody like a Jimmy Crute would be a good jumping off point. Jimmy Crute comes off of a decision win that maybe he didn't win against somebody else out of Fortis MMA. And so I think that would be there's a good storyline to that one. So that would be a good fight. And I think Krylov deserves somebody like a Jan Blachowicz. Jan is kind of like in no man's land right now. And I think that would be a good fight to try to put Nikita a little bit higher in the rankings. Is something that he probably deserves as far as moving him closer to a title, which obviously I'm sure that's what he aspires to. The next fight that was notable to me was Saeed Nurmagamedov against Jonathan Martinez. Great bantamweight fight. And again, I'll admit that I was pulling for Saeed. Saeed reminds me a lot of Zabit Magomedsharipov, who retired from featherweight. The one that looks like Abraham Lincoln, for those who don't know. He's a long rangey fighter for the division, does a lot of spinning attacks, a lot of long range distance attacks, and he's just exciting. He likes to finish fights on the feet, despite the Nurmagomedov last name. He's more of a striker, even though he can wrestle. He can definitely wrestle. But in this particular fight, what Jonathan did was he tried to eliminate that long range striking by closing the distance and getting him up against the cage, using a lot of clinch work, trying to get him on the ground. But during the clinch against the fence is where he did his most damage. And one in particular was when he nailed him with a elbow, upright elbow, and it hit Saeed right in the nose. And you could tell from that point forward, Saeed had trouble breathing. And of course, if you can't breathe, it's going to be hard to, really use your cardio in the fight. And that's when Saeed started to telegraph a lot of his shots. It made him very predictable. And Jonathan didn't necessarily take over, but I would say that he was the more fresh fighter and he continued to implement his game plan. And so the decision could have went either way, but I don't really fault them for going with Jonathan Martinez on that one. It was really tight towards the end. And I think that had that elbow night land, it might have been a different story, but that's just part of the fight. And Jonathan has actually replaced Saeed at the bottom of the rankings. Saeed's no longer in the rankings. I think Jonathan's at 14 now. So big thing for him. He called out Dominic Cruz, which I don't think that's realistic. I don't think Dominic's going to do that. But he also called out Deiveson Figueiredo, who moved up after the fight against Brandon Moreno that he lost. He said that he was moving up. So that would actually be a pretty good intro for Deiveson Figueiredo. Kind of a winnable fight, but I mean, I think that we'll really start to see what the size difference is there. That's actually a pretty big leap for Deiveson. I don't think Davison's frame is that big, but in fighting somebody who's more of a grinder like Jonathan Martinez is pretty interesting for his first fight. But hey, we'll see. They've done crazier things. And the last fight that I wanted to talk about from that card, which, I mean, I expected this one to be pretty exciting simply because Davey Grant's in it, but it was Davey Grant against Rafael Assuncao at bantamweight. Lots of bantamweight fights. Grant got the submission at 4 minutes and 43 seconds, an inverted triangle choke. So this fight was Rafael Assuncao's pretty much up until about the middle of the third round. Rafael was doing what he does, staying on the outside, choosing his moments to engage in grappling, and trying to really take away the same thing that happened to Saeed. He was trying to take away some of those long-range weapons. Davey Grant is one who puts a lot of power into his shots. He's really trying to end the fight with every strike, and you can tell he likes to make the fight gross and nasty, and he's more of a brawler, even though he has a lot of skills in a lot of different areas. What he does is, especially once the fight gets going, is he'll throw that right hand, and it's a looping right hand, but it has a lot of power on it. And in some ways, he kind of uses that looping right hand to set up other weird things. So he'll throw the looping right hand, and he'll throw a high kick, a right high kick. And those are his big power actions. And he'll throw them at any time. No telegraphing, nothing to do with anything, no setup. He'll just throw it. And eventually, he'll put a spinning back fist behind it. And as you're trying to get away from what you thought was the only thing that he was going to throw, he'll throw a spinning back fist. and that'll catch you. And that's exactly what happened to Rafael Assuncao in the third round. Once he dropped him with that, that's when they started to scramble. Rafael Assuncao was a little, I mean, obviously he was clipped by that, so he wasn't all there. And during the scramble, he got that inverted triangle choke, which was pretty cool that he got that, especially on Rafael Assuncao, who has amazing grappling credentials. And yeah, he put him out. I mean, out, like sleep. So that was pretty cool for Davey Grant. Davey Grant's 37. So his time is running short. So he's going to really want to transition up the bantamweight rankings as quickly as possible. He's probably going to try to fight somebody that will try to pull him into those rankings and try to make that move up as quickly as he can before his time in the UFC is done. So, but he is a very exciting fighter. I definitely think that his next fight is going to be something that's going to be a barn burner. The UFC definitely likes him. For Rafael Assuncao, he actually called it a career after this one, which if for fighters that are retiring, a lot of them go out in terrible fashion. They get knocked out like Frankie Edgar, like he got destroyed in his last fight. A lot of them go out in terrible fashion, and he was actually going to win this fight. If he didn't get caught with that spinning back fist, he was going to win. And I'm sure that's the way that he wanted to go out. But if you're not going to win and you're going to go out, you want to be at least competitive. And he did that. He had every opportunity to win this fight. And so calling it a career here is, unless you're a champion and leaving on your own terms, this is not a bad way to go. He had a really solid career, the most fight time in bantamweight history and the most fights in bantamweight history. So he's definitely an underground legend. So moving on to current talk. So a couple of questions that came up from just kind of the conversations on Twitter and just in the world of the UFC. One question that popped up was, should Sean O'Malley, who's now the number 2 ranked bantamweight, should he serve as the backup for Cejudo versus Sterling at UFC 288? So my answer to that is no, he shouldn't. If I'm Sean O'Malley, I'm not gonna do that. Sure, you get paid to weigh in, and you get to go and you kind of go on a little media tour, a little mini media tour, and more than likely you're not going to be called to fight. Why wouldn't you do it? Well, what if you are called to fight and you lose? So now you've kind of shit the bed on your opportunity. You pretty much lose that, and that drops you down. And now you're fighting your way back to a title again. It doesn't look good, and they do hold it against you. So if you're not prepared to fight during that time, no, I wouldn't. Secondly, if I'm the UFC, no, I don't want Sean O'Malley to be the backup fighter because he is the money fight in the division. He's the most popular in the division. So why would I try to shoehorn him into a title fight without having a full media cycle, a full amount of time to really push that fight and get the best bang for my buck as far as pay-per-view buys are concerned? No, absolutely not. And then secondly, they're not going to use Merab, because if Aljo were the one that got hurt, then Merab could fill in. But then what if he wins? Now you got an interim title with somebody who not going to fight the title holder. That doesn't make sense. So Merab's not going to be it either. I think your best bet may be, I don't know, Cheeto and Sandhagen are locked up. You could try that. You could try using one of them as a backup. It kind of like they did with Jamal Hill, where Jamal actually was scheduled already to fight. And because of unforeseen circumstances with that draw with Ankalaev and Jan Blachowicz pushed Jamal Hill into the title fight, you could maybe do something like that, maybe, but I don't know. That's a tough one, but I know who you can't use, and that's Merab, and that's Sean O'Malley. No. The next thing that's kind of hot right now is the Volkanovski against Yair Rodriguez. That title fight is in the works for International Fight Week. And International Fight Week is always a stack card. I'm hoping to convince my wife to go to that one. That one would be amazing to go to, because that the card is going to be amazing. Right now, it's rumored to have the Alexander Volkanovski, the Yair Rodriguez fight and the John Jones and Stipe Miocic fight. Just those two alone are amazing, but they're going to stack it with even more. They may even have 3 championship fights. You never know. That would be typical of what they do on International Fight Week. International Fight Week is also, because of COVID, it's been gone away. So now they've brought it back. They're going to have more of the fan forums and fighter meet and greets and things like that. So it's going to be an amazing time. Obviously, if you can make it there, that is like the dream event for a UFC fan. So I think that will be an amazing fight. I am personally pulling for Yair because that's on my bingo card, my UFC bingo card. So, which I'll make a video about that later on. Me and my wife got a bet going on that one. So that one's going to be pretty important for me to win that bet. And that's what's important, is me winning. So the last thing, Benson Henderson retires. Benson Henderson's been fighting in Bellator for the past few years, but people forget he is a former UFC champion. And he's had a really great career despite, the downturn since going to Bellator. Bellator, he's fought for a couple of belts, but lost them. And, he had a couple of ups and downs, but as most fighters that leave the UFC do, they're mostly downs because the UFC doesn't cut bait with people that they think are on the upswing. So, but Ben Henderson has had a great career. The former WEC champion, defended the belt once, and then became the UFC champion and defended the belt 3 times. So that's 4 title defenses under the UFC WEC banner, which the three title defenses actually ties him with Khabib. So that's something that most people might not know. So we talk about how dominant Khabib is. Only 3 title defenses. Interesting. So, and he lost his titles all to the same person, Anthony Pettis. That's the birth of the Showtime kick on the first one. And then Anthony Pettis caught him in a submission on the second one and lost his belt. But Ben Henderson was a great fighter. He's going to take time to be with his family and then support his wife's career, who she's also in Bellator as a fighter. So definitely a great career for him. So let's talk about what is coming up. Some fights that I announced. Only 2 that I'll mention. Only 2 that kind of pop out to me. Kron Gracie versus Charles Jourdain. So that's another Gracie. Gracie is coming back. And Kron kind of reminds me of a smaller Jason Momoa. But I believe the last time, or at least the last time that I remember him fight, was against Cub Swanson, and Cub got the win. So Kron has been away for a couple of years. He was undefeated, I think, up until that point. He's a really good fighter. He obviously is heavy on the jiu-jitsu side. He's a wizard at jiu-jitsu, as the last name indicates. So he'll fight the Charles Jourdain, who is highly action-packed. I don't think I've seen a boring Charles Jourdain fight. They're going to fight at UFC 288. Also, finally announced for UFC 288 is Aljamain Sterling and Henry Cejudo, Triple C. That name actually grew on me. At first I hated it, and I don't necessarily like when he's in his character, but when he's just Henry Cejudo, he actually is kind of likable. He actually did some stand-up too, and it was kind of funny. So Henry Cejudo has a lot of facets to him, but when he enters into the Henry Cejudo or Triple C mask, that I don't dig that. But this is probably one of the fights that is kind of the most hated fight. So who's going to be the most hated? People are going to watch it because they want to see both of them lose. People obviously do not like Aljamain Sterling. He's kind of been given a raw deal a little bit. He's just had some unforeseen circumstances, kind of similar to the way that Tyron Woodley was, where he just had some weird ill matchups or weird things that happened during fights that he did come out on the good side of. Is just people just perceived him a certain way, and Aljo is no different, and he doesn't make himself or give himself any breathing room for it and some of the stuff that he says, and unfortunately people don't view him the way that they should. But Aljo is a legit champion, and I think that this fight is going to be very interesting. I think that Henry Cejudo actually has the striking advantage, even though Aljamain has a much longer reach. But Aljo still isn't a fluid striker. So it will be interesting to see if the size advantage that Aljo has is something that he uses against Henry Cejudo, who is coming up. I mean, he was the bantamweight champion, but he fought in bantamweight, twice, maybe once. He's not necessarily a true bantamweight in the form of he's been there for a while. He's more of a flyweight, but he's a big guy now. But I think that Aljo will still be bigger on fight night. And I mean, obviously, you see how big he was against TJ. Like, he looked massive. But Aljo, his wrestling versus Henry's wrestling, I mean, they're different levels, man. Like, Henry's an Olympic champion. That's a different level completely. So it'll be interesting to see how that shakes out. I'm going for Aljo. I think I'll go for Aljo on this one, I guess. And if Henry loses, I would think that he retires for good. So let's look into what's happening this week, a big fight week. So this is UFC 286, Leon Edwards against Kamaru Usman. Huge fight week. This is the rematch, or at least the rubber fight. So Kamaru beat him first. Leon knocked him out second. Let's see what happens third. And so the big question to me is, what Leon will we see heading into this fight? Will we see round 1 and round 5 Leon, or are we going to see rounds 2 through 4 Leon? So round 1 and round 5 Leon were methodical. They stuck to the game plan. They had good setups, and they had the fight right where they wanted it. Round 2 through 4 Leon just did exactly what Kamaru wanted them to do. They just laid on their back and allowed Kamaru to do whatever he wanted. So it's going to be telling to see, did this confidence boost of winning this belt, knowing that he can put him out. He can do, he can utilize his striking, he can utilize his wrestling, offensive wrestling, to put the fight in advantageous places for Leon. Is he going to implement that? Is he going to do that? And for Kamaru, is he actually done? He's 35 years old, which is not old, but this is the UFC. When you start to decline, a lot of times it happens fast. Is Kamaru on the decline? Can he do what he did in rounds 2 through 4? He knows the head kick's coming, but he also knows that Leon's not going to just limit it to head kicks. He's going to do other things. So, how have him and his team set up the game plan to not allow that to happen? We'll see. Just of note, I did put Kamaru Usman as the winner on my bingo card. I'm pulling for Leon though, but I think that rounds 2 through 4 told me a lot. And I think that Kamaru is going to do the same thing. He's going to put that pace on him and put him in a grappling match. And unless Leon decides to be offensive with his grappling and make Kamaru think about, being taken down too, it's going to be more of the same. So I hope that Leon takes notes from what he did in round 1 and tries to implement that type of game. And if he does that, then this is a totally different fight. So the next fight, the co-main, lightweight, Justin Gaethje against Rafael Fiziev. This is going to be fight of the night. I think everybody knows that. Any fight that Justin Gaethje is in is going to be fight of the night. That's just a given. But him against Rafael Fiziev is going to be, or Rafael Fiziev is going to be fireworks. A lot of people are looking at this as the part where Justin Gaethje starts to decline. He's fighting somebody who is very proficient in Muay Thai. I think he's the lead or the head of Tiger Muay Thai. And I think that Justin Gaethje, some of the inactivity will affect his timing. This is only a 3-round fight, and Justin Gaethje can't give any rounds away. So are we going to see the Justin Gaethje that systematically dismantled people, like Tony Ferguson? Or are we going to see Justin Gaethje go back to the Michael Johnson Gaethje because he only has a limited amount of time, and see who wants to quit first and put Rafael Fiziev in that type of fight? Actually, I think that if he goes back to the Michael Johnson one, he actually has a higher chance of winning. If he tries to make it a strategic striking match. Rafael Fiziev is faster, and so I think that he's going to be beat to the punch a lot. And Rafael, he has no problems going to decision and making it just a point fighting match if he wanted to, even though he can put Gaethje out if it comes to that as well. So I think this is going to be an exciting fight. I kind of side with Fiziev on this one, even though, I do kind of pull for Gaethje. The welterweight fight, Gunnar Nelson against Brian Barberena. So the question on this one is, will Barberena keep it standing so he doesn't get submitted? Gunnar Nelson is notably a submission artist. He's going to be looking for submissions. His strikes just lead to submissions. He's all about trying to get it to the ground, trying to get the person tangled up in a submission and getting out of there that way. Barberena is more of a brawler. He does get hit a lot, but he gets people, he's more of a I'll take one to give you two type of person, but he gets taken down a lot. And so I think that this is right in Gunnar Nelson's wheelhouse. If Gunnar can get it to the ground at any point, I think that he submits him at any point, whether it's in round 1 or round 3. If Barberena slips on a banana peel and he falls down and Nelson is able to get him, it's going to be a submission. So I think I'll just say submission round 2. The next one, the flyweight, Jennifer Maia against Casey O'Neill, King Casey O'Neill, which I think she has one of the best nicknames in the women's divisions. King Casey O'Neill, that is a dope nickname. So the question is, will Casey ride the hype train past Jennifer Maia? So Jennifer Maia is a really good fighter. I think she has a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. She's well-rounded. She's got a lot of fights, a lot of experience that Casey doesn't have, but Casey's on that bullet train to stardom. And I don't know if she's gonna be able to ride that past Jennifer Maia, but I would favor King Casey on this one. I think that she'll get her in some grappling exchanges, and Casey might be the stronger person in this one and be able to get some more dominant positions and see if she can get a submission. Kind of see it going that way. And middleweight, which this is actually a really big fight that people aren't really talking about, which is Marvin Vettori against Roman Dolidze. So the question is Roman ready for the leap in competition, or is Marvin going to parlay a win into a title shot? Marvin is another fighter who is kind of in no man's land, where he has a loss to some of the top contenders, but he's beaten a lot of people who are below him. So I think Marvin actually puts the pace on Dolidze. Marvin is a very cerebral fighter, and I think that he's going to use his experience to get Roman in some bad positions. I don't think that he finishes them. I think it's going to be a unanimous decision, but I think he just outsmarts him. And Roman has a lot of aggression with his fighting, but I don't think it's going to pay off in this one. And he gets a little humbled, not in a knockout or a submission sort of way, but I think he just can't find a path to victory on this one. So I think that this one goes Marvin's way. 3 more to talk about, and these are on the prelims. Jack Shore against Mako Namarakani. Can Jack Shore make the jump to featherweight successfully? So Jack Shore is coming off of a loss and jumping up to featherweight. I think that they are feeding Americani to him, and I think this is a really good fight for him to start his featherweight journey. I definitely got Jack Shore on this one. Not to say that Mako can't win it, but his path to victory is very small. His window is very small. I don't see Jack Shore losing this one. For flyweight, Muhammad Mokaev against Rafael Filho. This is another feeder fight. Mokaev is ranked. I think that Filho, this is his first fight in the UFC, unless he surprises everyone. I think that this is Mokaev's fight to lose. It should be an easy victory for him. And the last one, featherweight, Lerone Murphy against Gabriel Santos. This one's going to be interesting. Gabriel Santos is the LFA champion. So for those that don't know, the LFA is the Legacy Fighting Championship. So it's a feeder organization into the UFC. Gabriel is a champion there. So he's a legit fighter, got a lot of experience on the regional level, but he's going to the big show now. and Lerone Murphy is an undefeated fighter. And I think that he's going to show why he's undefeated, why he's in the UFC, and why Gabriel Santos is just making this transition here. I don't think this is going to boot Santos from but I hate saying this, but there are levels to this. So, and Lerone Murphy's probably going to show that that's true. So that's a lot to preview, a lot to talk about, but that's the UFC 286. That's going to be an amazing card. And of course, we'll be here to talk about it afterwards. So if you do want to reach out to us, you can hit us on Twitter or by email. We'll definitely talk to you and get you up on what you need to know. So until then, until next week, we'll see you.